The last time Margaret Whitmore called me worthless was on a Tuesday morning in March, standing in my own kitchen while I fixed her daughter's broken garbage disposal. She had driven over from her Scottsdale estate unannounced, wearing pearls at 9 a.m. and that expression she reserved for things beneath her notice. I was elbow deep in pipe fittings when she announced that Sarah deserved better than a man who spent his days with his hands dirty and his bank account empty. What she didn't know was that 3 hours earlier I had closed the largest commercial real estate deal in Phoenix history. $27 million in profit to be exact, but Margaret had never asked about my work and I had never volunteered the information. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is David Chen, and at 43 I had learned to measure success in silence rather than speeches. Sarah and I lived in a modest ranch house in Tempe, Arizona, the kind of place where neighbors know your name and the mortgage payment doesn't require two incomes. From the outside it looked like we were getting by, maybe struggling a little. Inside it was home. But Margaret saw only what she wanted to see: dated kitchen appliances, furniture we had bought second-hand, and a husband who wore work boots instead of dress shoes. The truth was more complicated than Margaret's assumptions, but truth takes time to unfold. I had spent the last 8 years building something she couldn't see from her leather seats and charity luncheons. While she was writing checks to causes that looked good on tax returns, I was buying distressed properties with cash, renovating them in the evenings and weekends, then flipping them to investors who paid premium prices for quality work. Sarah knew I bought and sold houses, but she didn't know the scale of what I had assembled. She thought I was handy with tools and had a good eye for bargains. She was right about both, but she was also counting in thousands while I was operating in millions. The disposal job took 20 minutes. I replaced the motor mount, cleared the drain line, and tested the unit until it hummed like new machinery. Margaret watched from the doorway, checking her phone and sighing at intervals that suggested I was taking too long. When I finished, I washed my hands and offered her coffee. She declined with the kind of politeness that feels like a small slap. Sarah was at work, managing social media for a non-profit downtown, so it was just Margaret and me in the quiet kitchen. That's when she delivered her verdict. "David," she said, adjusting her purse strap like a woman preparing to leave a disappointing restaurant, "I need to speak plainly with you. Sarah is my only daughter and I worry about her future." She paused, letting the words find their target. "You're a kind man, but kindness doesn't pay mortgages or build retirement housemen. She deserves security, stability, a partner who can provide more than temporary fixes to broken appliances." I dried my hands slowly, folding the towel with the kind of precision that keeps your voice steady when your pulse wants to run. Margaret had never asked what I did for a living beyond the obvious. She had never inquired about our finances, our plans, or our dreams. She saw work clothes and assumed poverty. She saw a modest house and assumed limitation. She saw a man who fixed things and assumed that was all he could do. Margaret continued her assessment like a performance review I hadn't requested. "I know Sarah loves you," she said, "but love doesn't pay for vacations in Europe or children's college funds. It doesn't buy the kind of life she grew up with, the kind of life she deserves." Her voice carried the weight of a woman who had married well and expected her daughter to do the same. She had married a successful orthodontist, lived in a house with mountain views, and belonged to clubs that charged more for membership than most people earned in a year. I could have told her then. Could have mentioned the portfolio of commercial properties I owned across 3 states, the development projects that were reshaping downtown Phoenix, or the private equity firm that had been courting me for months. Could have described the investment accounts that grew while I slept, the rental income that arrived like clockwork, or the construction crews who called me boss. Instead, I asked if she wanted sugar with her coffee, even though she had already declined the cup. The thing about building wealth quietly is that people assume you don't have any. When you drive a 10-year-old pickup truck because it runs well and hauls materials, people think you can't afford newer. When you live in a house you could pay off tomorrow but choose to keep mortgaged for tax advantages, people assume you're stretched thin. When you wear work boots because your day involves construction sites and property inspections, people think you're blue-collar poor instead of blue-collar rich. Margaret's evaluation continued with the persistence of someone who believed her opinions carried the weight of truth. "You're almost 50, David," she said, though I was actually 43. "At your age, most successful men have established themselves, built something substantial." She gestured around the kitchen as if the evidence spoke for itself. "I don't see that here. I see a man who works with his hands, which is honest work, but not the kind that builds legacies." That word legacy hung in the air like smoke from a fire that needed putting out. Margaret understood legacy as things you could photograph for holiday cards. Houses with circular driveways, cars that depreciated gracefully, and vacation photos from places that required passports. My legacy lived in spreadsheets and property deeds, in buildings that created jobs and housing that sheltered families. But legacy, like wealth, sometimes hides in plain sight. I finished wiping down the counter and hung the towel on its hook. Margaret was gathering her purse and keys, preparing to leave with her message delivered. Before she reached the door, I asked a question that had been building for months. "Margaret, what do you think I do for a living?" She paused, hand on the doorknob, and turned back with the expression of someone who had been asked to explain something obvious. "You fix houses," she said. "You buy run-down places and repair them. It's good work, but it's not career work. It's not the kind of work that builds wealth." She was right about the fixing and buying. She was wrong about everything else. That morning, before her unannounced visit, I had signed papers transferring ownership of a shopping center in Scottsdale to a retail development company. The center had been vacant when I bought it 18 months earlier, nothing but cracked asphalt and broken windows. I had spent nights and weekends restoring it, replacing everything from electrical systems to landscaping. The buyer was paying 3 times what I had invested, and the profit would fund the next project. But Margaret saw only the surface, a man in work clothes who showed up when appliances broke. She didn't see the business meetings in downtown conference rooms, the architectural plans spread across dining room tables after dinner, or the phone calls with contractors who respected my opinion because my checks never bounced. She didn't know about the private banking relationship that handled transactions too large for regular accounts, or the attorney who called me by my first name because we had closed dozens of deals together. After Margaret left, I sat in the kitchen and thought about the distance between perception and reality. Sarah would be home in a few hours, and I would tell her about her mother's visit. I would mention the repaired disposal and the coffee that was declined. I might mention the conversation about my future, though I wouldn't repeat the harsher parts. Sarah knew her mother had opinions about our life together, but she didn't know how specific those opinions had become. The truth was that I had been protecting both of them from something neither fully understood. Sarah thought I was successful enough to support our comfortable life, which was true but incomplete. Margaret thought I was struggling to stay afloat, which was false but understandable given the evidence she chose to see.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Both of them were about to learn that the man they thought they knew was actually someone else entirely. That evening, I made dinner while Sarah told me about her day at the nonprofit. She managed their online presence, created content that helped them raise funds for homeless services, and coordinated with volunteers who gave their time to worthy causes. Her work mattered in ways that couldn't be measured in profit margins, and I respected that kind of contribution. We talked about her projects, the challenge of stretching donor dollars, and the satisfaction of helping people rebuild their lives. After dinner, we walked around the neighborhood as we did most evenings when the Arizona heat finally broke. Sarah mentioned that her mother had stopped by, and I confirmed the disposal repair. We didn't discuss Margaret's assessment of my prospects, or her concerns about Sarah's future. Those conversations would come later, when the timing felt right, and the stakes were clear. The next morning, I drove to a property I owned on the east side of Phoenix. It was a warehouse district that most people avoided, but I saw potential in the empty buildings and cheap land. I had been buying parcels there for 3 years, assembling enough acreage to interest the kind of developers who thought in terms of city blocks rather than individual lots. The coffee shop where I met my real estate attorney was the kind of place that served espresso in paper cups and didn't ask questions about men in work boots discussing million-dollar transactions. James Rodriguez had been my attorney since my first commercial purchase 8 years earlier. He was younger than me, but understood the business better than lawyers twice his age. We reviewed contracts while construction workers at the next table argued about football and overtime pay. The documents were for a sale that would close the following month, 14 acres of warehouse space, to a logistics company that needed room to expand. The price was $8 million for land I had assembled for less than 2. James asked about my plans for the profit, and I told him I was considering residential development in Chandler. The market there was heating up, and I had identified a tract that could support 200 homes if the zoning could be changed. He made notes about environmental studies and municipal approvals, the kind of due diligence that separated successful developers from cautious ones who never pulled triggers. We finished our business in 40 minutes, and I drove to a job site where my crew was renovating a duplex in central Phoenix. These were the projects that kept my hands dirty and my skills sharp, the smaller deals that filled the gaps between larger acquisitions. I worked alongside men who had been with me for years, guys who understood that the boss who wrote their checks was also willing to carry drywall and run electrical cable. Around noon my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The caller introduced himself as Tom Whitmore, Margaret's husband, Sarah's stepfather. He asked if we could meet for lunch, said he had something to discuss that couldn't wait for a more convenient time. His voice carried an urgency that suggested this wasn't about family dinner plans or holiday schedules. We met at a steakhouse in Scottsdale, the kind of place where businessmen made deals over prime rib and handshakes. Tom was already seated when I arrived, wearing a suit that suggested his orthodontics practice was doing well. He stood to shake hands, and his grip was firm enough to convey respect without trying to prove anything. We ordered quickly and got to the point faster. "David," he said, "Margaret told me about your conversation yesterday. She's concerned about Sarah's future, about your ability to provide the kind of life she grew up with." He paused to sip his iced tea, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to know that I don't share all of her concerns, but I do think we should talk honestly about where things stand." Tom was a different kind of man than his wife. He had built his practice from nothing, understood the value of work that left your hands dirty, and respected people who created value rather than just inherited it. But he also loved Margaret and wanted peace in his house, which meant navigating carefully between his wife's opinions and his own observations. I could have ended the conversation there with a simple explanation of my financial situation, could have mentioned the real estate portfolio, the development projects, or the bank statements that would settle all questions about my ability to provide. Instead, I asked Tom what he thought I should do. His answer revealed more about the family dynamics than I had understood before. "Margaret comes from old money," he said. "Her grandfather built a mining fortune, her father expanded it into real estate, and she grew up assuming that wealth meant certain things: private schools, country clubs, houses in the right neighborhoods. She married me because I was building something substantial, because she could see a future that matched her expectations." Tom explained that Margaret measured men by visible markers of success: the cars they drove, the clothes they wore, the neighborhoods where they lived. She had trouble recognizing wealth that didn't announce itself, success that operated quietly, or men who chose substance over style. He wasn't making excuses for her opinions, just providing context for them. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Tom talked about his early years in practice, the struggle to build a patient base and establish credibility in a competitive field. He described the pressure of living up to Margaret's expectations while trying to stay true to his own values. He spoke with the honesty of a man who had navigated similar waters and understood the currents. When lunch ended, Tom made a request that surprised me. He asked if I would consider having a more direct conversation with Margaret, explaining exactly what I did for a living and how successful I had become. He thought transparency might change her perspective and reduce the tension that was affecting everyone in the family. I promised to think about it, which was true. I had been considering how and when to reveal the full scope of my business interests, but I hadn't decided on the timing or the approach. Margaret's visit had accelerated the timeline, but it hadn't determined the method. That evening, Sarah and I had dinner on the patio, while the desert sunset painted the sky in shades that photographers spend careers trying to capture. She was unusually quiet, picking at her food and checking her phone more frequently than normal. When I asked what was troubling her, she set down her fork and looked at me with the expression of someone who had been carrying a weight too heavy for one person. "My mother thinks you're not good enough for me," she said. The words came out in a rush, like she had been holding them back until they forced their way out. "She thinks I'm settling, that I could do better if I tried harder." Sarah's voice carried a mixture of anger and sadness, frustration with her mother and confusion about her own feelings. I asked her what she thought, and her answer revealed the complexity of the situation. "I love you," she said, "but sometimes I wonder if we want the same things. I see my friends buying newer houses, taking expensive vacations, planning for futures that seem more secure than ours. I don't need wealth, but I do need to know that we're building something together." That night, lying in bed while Sarah slept, I made a decision that had been building for months. The time for quiet success had passed, the time for visible achievement had arrived. Margaret needed to understand who I really was, and Sarah needed to see the future I had been building for us. But first, I needed to show them something that would change everything they thought they knew about David Chen. The next morning, I called my accountant and scheduled a meeting for the following day. I asked him to prepare a comprehensive overview of my assets, income and net worth, the kind of document that banks required for major loan applications. I called my attorney and asked him to compile a list of all property transactions from the past 5 years, complete with purchase prices, improvement costs, and sale proceeds. I spent that afternoon visiting 3 of my current development projects. The first was a mixed-use complex in Tempe, where retail space on the ground floor would support residential units above. The second was a warehouse conversion in downtown Phoenix that would become loft apartments for young professionals. The third was a strip mall renovation in Chandler that would house medical offices and service businesses. At each location, I walked the properties with my project managers, reviewing progress and approving change orders. These were men who had worked with me for years, who understood my standards for quality and my expectations for timelines. They called me by name, and Sarah would understand why I had been confident about our future even when she worried about our present. Margaret would learn that her assumptions about my worth were not just wrong but spectacularly incorrect, and I would finally be free to discuss my work openly instead of operating in the shadows of other people's perceptions. But first I needed to prepare for the consequences of truth. Success that hides can also disappear if not properly protected. Wealth that operates quietly can become loud if not carefully managed. The man who fixed garbage disposals was about to become the man who owned the buildings where the garbage disposals were installed. The transformation would begin with documents that proved what words could not. Numbers that spoke louder than explanations. Evidence that turned assumptions into apologies and doubts into respect. Margaret Whitmore was about to learn that worthless was the last word anyone should use to describe David Chen. The documents arrived at my accountant's office on a Thursday morning, delivered by courier in a leather portfolio that suggested the contents deserved serious attention. Rachel Martinez had been handling my finances since the 3rd year of my business expansion, back when my income jumped from comfortable to complicated. She understood the difference between managing money and managing wealth, and she knew how to present numbers in ways that told clear stories. When I walked into her conference room, Rachel had 3 identical folders arranged on the polished table. Each contained the same information presented in different formats, one for attorneys, one for bankers, and one for family members who needed to understand without getting lost in technical details. She handed me the family version first, and I opened it to find my financial life reduced to pages that could change everything. The summary page listed my net worth at $47 million. The breakdown showed real estate holdings worth $32 million, investment accounts totaling $8 million, business assets valued at $5 million, and cash reserves of $2 million. Below those numbers, Rachel had included a comparison chart showing how my wealth ranked against national averages, state medians, and local benchmarks. The message was clear: David Chen was not struggling to get by. Rachel walked me through each section, explaining how she had calculated property values, assessed business equity, and projected income streams. The residential portfolio alone generated rental income of $80,000 monthly. The commercial properties produced another $120,000. Investment dividends added $30,000. Before I worked a single hour or closed a single deal, money arrived in my accounts like clockwork. She pointed to a graph showing wealth accumulation over the past 8 years. The line climbed steadily from my first property purchase to my current position, with steeper increases during years when major developments sold. The pattern revealed a business model that worked consistently, not a series of lucky breaks or market timing. The second folder contained property records documenting every transaction since I started investing seriously. Purchase agreements, improvement costs, sale contracts, and profit calculations created a paper trail that proved capability rather than claiming it. Each deal showed the same pattern: buy distressed properties below market value, improve them systematically, then sell to investors who paid premium prices for quality work. Rachel had organized the properties by category and geography: single-family homes in established neighborhoods, duplexes and small apartment buildings in growth areas, commercial spaces in districts undergoing revitalization, vacant land in the path of suburban expansion. Each category served a different purpose in the overall strategy, but all contributed to the same results: steady appreciation and consistent cash flow. The third folder focused on active projects and future plans: development proposals for residential subdivisions, commercial complexes, and mixed-use communities, contracts with architects, engineers, and construction managers, permits filed with municipal authorities and approvals pending with planning commissions. This section showed wealth in motion rather than wealth at rest. I asked Rachel to prepare additional copies for specific audiences. One set for Sarah, simplified but complete enough to answer her questions about our financial security. Another set for Margaret, detailed enough to eliminate any doubt about my business success. A third set for Tom, who would appreciate the technical aspects and understand the strategic thinking behind each investment. After leaving Rachel's office, I drove to the construction site where my crew was finishing the duplex renovation. The contrast between those documents and this workspace revealed the full scope of what I had built. Men who respected my ability to solve problems with tools and materials. Numbers that proved my ability to solve problems with capital and strategy. Both skills mattered, but only one was visible to people who measured success by appearances. My foreman Carlos Hernandez met me at the job trailer with coffee that had been brewing too long and updates that couldn't wait. The electrical inspection had passed with no corrections required. The plumbing was complete except for fixture installation. The flooring crew would arrive Monday to finish the hardwood refinishing. We would be ready for final inspection by Friday, then listing for sale the following week. Carlos had worked with me since my third property purchase, back when I was doing most of the labor myself and subcontracting only specialized work. He had watched the operation grow from weekend projects to full-time enterprise, from single properties to multiple developments. His opinion mattered because his paycheck depended on my success, and successful men don't waste time pretending respect they don't feel. We walked through both units, checking details that would determine sale price and speed of closing. Fresh paint in neutral colors that appealed to most buyers. Updated fixtures that suggested modern convenience without shocking traditional sensibilities. Flooring that looked expensive but would survive ordinary abuse. Windows that operated smoothly and sealed tightly against Arizona weather. The duplex would sell for $320,000 to an investor who specialized in rental properties. I had purchased it 18 months earlier for $180,000, spent $40,000 on improvements and carried costs of another $15,000. The profit margin was comfortable but not spectacular, exactly the kind of steady return that built wealth without attracting unnecessary attention. While Carlos finished his inspection, I sat in the truck and called Sarah. Her assistant said she was in a meeting that would last another hour, but she could take a message if it was urgent. I said I would call back later, which was true but incomplete. The conversation I needed to have with Sarah required privacy and time, neither of which could be scheduled around her work commitments. Instead, I called Margaret's house and asked if she was available for an unscheduled visit. Tom answered and said she was home but hadn't expected to see me. He asked if everything was okay, and I said everything was fine, but I had information that couldn't wait for a more convenient time. He gave me directions to their house, though I had been there dozens of times for family gatherings and holiday celebrations. The drive from central Phoenix to Scottsdale took 40 minutes in afternoon traffic that moved like a slow river, carrying commuters toward suburbs they could afford because the economy was working. Margaret's neighborhood was the kind of place where landscape architects designed drought-resistant gardens that never looked like they were struggling for water. Houses sat on lots large enough for privacy but small enough for maintenance, with architectural styles that suggested prosperity without advertising exact amounts. Margaret answered the door wearing casual clothes that had cost more than most people's formal wear. She invited me inside with the politeness reserved for unexpected guests who might be bearing bad news. Tom emerged from his office still wearing scrubs from his afternoon patients and offered drinks that we both declined. We sat in their living room, which had been decorated by professionals who understood how to combine comfort with status. I set the leather portfolio on the coffee table between us and explained what it contained. Financial documents, I said. Information about my business activities and current net worth. I thought it was time for both of you to understand exactly what I do for a living. Margaret's expression shifted from polite attention to genuine curiosity. She had been expecting an explanation of my work schedule or a request for financial assistance, not a presentation about business success. Tom leaned forward with the interest of someone who had built his own wealth and recognized the language of serious money. I opened the portfolio and handed Margaret the summary page. She read the numbers twice, then looked at me with the expression of someone trying to reconcile new information with existing assumptions. Tom read over her shoulder, and I watched his eyebrows rise as he processed the figures. $47 million, Margaret said, reading from the page as if speaking the numbers aloud might make them more believable. Tom asked where the wealth was concentrated, and I explained the breakdown between real estate, investments, and business assets. Neither of them spoke for several minutes while they absorbed information that changed everything they thought they knew about David Chen. Margaret asked how long I had been building this level of wealth, and I walked them through the timeline. First property purchase 8 years ago using savings from my job as a project manager for a construction company. Early investments in distressed residential properties that could be improved and resold quickly. Gradual expansion into commercial real estate as capital accumulated and experience grew. She wanted to know why I had never mentioned the scope of my business activities, and I explained the advantages of operating quietly. Sellers negotiate differently when they think you're struggling to raise capital. Contractors quote differently when they assume you're working on thin margins. Family members treat you differently when they think you need their advice about financial planning. Tom understood immediately. He described his own experience building his practice, the years when he had more equipment debt than income, the pressure of proving himself to patients who could choose any orthodontist in the city. He had learned to project confidence even when cash flow was uncertain, to appear established even when everything depended on the next month's collections. But Margaret struggled with the implications of what she was learning. If David was worth $47 million, then her concerns about Sarah's financial security were not just wrong but embarrassingly so. If he owned properties across 3 states and generated 6-figure monthly income without working, then her assumptions about his capabilities were based on incomplete information. She asked to see the property records, and I handed her the second folder. Page after page of purchase agreements, improvement invoices, and sale contracts that documented systematic wealth building over nearly a decade. The pattern was clear: identify undervalued assets, improve them efficiently, then sell to investors who paid market rates for quality work. Margaret studied the documents with the attention of someone who had never seen wealth created from nothing, only inherited or married. Her father's mining fortune had come from claims staked in the early 20th century. Her husband's orthodontics income came from patients who paid for services they needed. But real estate development required different skills: market analysis, project management, risk assessment, and capital allocation. She asked about my background in construction and real estate, and I explained my education and experience. Engineering degree from Arizona State University. 5 years as a project manager for a commercial construction company. Continuing education in real estate finance, property management, and development planning. Professional relationships with attorneys, accountants, architects, and contractors who had worked with me on multiple projects. Tom wanted to know about my development pipeline, and I described the projects currently in planning and permitting phases. 2 residential subdivisions in growing suburbs where young families were buying their first homes. An office complex in downtown Phoenix where businesses were expanding despite economic uncertainty. A retail center in Chandler where national chains were competing for prime locations. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Margaret asked detailed questions about investment strategy, risk management, and long-term planning. Tom inquired about market cycles, competitive positioning, and regulatory challenges. Both of them gradually shifted from skepticism to acceptance to something approaching respect. When the documents were returned to the portfolio, Margaret sat back in her chair and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. She was studying my face as if seeing it for the first time, trying to reconcile the man who fixed garbage disposals with the man who owned shopping centers. "David," she said finally, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on limited information. I judged your worth based on appearances rather than substance." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology was unexpected but appreciated. Margaret was not a woman who admitted mistakes easily or often. Her willingness to acknowledge error suggested that the revelation had impact beyond simple embarrassment. She was reconsidering not just her opinion of me, but her understanding of how wealth could be built and maintained. Tom asked about my plans for sharing this information with Sarah, and I explained my thinking. She deserved to know the full scope of our financial security, but she also needed to understand why I had kept the details private. The conversation would require timing and context that I hadn't yet determined. Margaret offered an unexpected suggestion. She proposed hosting a family dinner where I could present the information to Sarah in a supportive environment. Tom could be there to answer questions about business and investment strategy. Margaret could provide context about the family's financial history and expectations. The revelation would become a celebration rather than a confrontation. I appreciated the offer but explained that Sarah and I needed to have the conversation privately first. She would want time to process the information and ask questions without an audience. Family support would matter later, but initial disclosure required privacy and patience. We agreed to meet again the following week to discuss how the information would be shared and what changes it might bring to family dynamics. Margaret acknowledged that her concerns about Sarah's future had been based on faulty assumptions. Tom expressed interest in learning more about real estate investment strategies and possibly collaborating on future projects. As I prepared to leave, Margaret made one final comment that revealed how completely her perspective had changed. She said that Sarah was fortunate to have married a man who combined practical skills with business intelligence, someone who could fix problems and prevent them. The woman who had called me worthless 2 days earlier was now describing me as an ideal husband. The drive home gave me time to process what had just occurred. Margaret's transformation from critic to supporter had happened faster than I had expected, but it was also more complete than I had hoped. She now understood not just my current wealth but the thinking and effort that had created it. She recognized the difference between inherited privilege and earned success, but the harder conversation still waited. Sarah would need to understand why I had hidden the scope of my business activities for years. She would want to know how this revelation changed our plans for the future. She would ask questions about lifestyle changes, charitable giving, and family planning that I hadn't fully considered myself. When I arrived home, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner with the focused attention she brought to tasks that mattered. She looked up when I entered, smiled the way married people do when ordinary moments feel like small celebrations, and asked about my day. I told her about the construction progress, the meeting with my accountant, and the visit with her parents. She was surprised that I had visited her mother unannounced and curious about the reason for the meeting. I explained that Margaret and I had needed to clear the air about some misunderstandings, that we had discussed my work and our family's future. Sarah asked if everything was resolved, and I said it was moving in the right direction. After dinner, we sat on the patio while desert darkness settled over the neighborhood and porch lights created small pools of civilization in the vast emptiness beyond the city limits. Sarah mentioned that her mother had seemed different during their phone call that afternoon, more positive about our marriage and more interested in our long-term plans. I asked Sarah what she knew about my business activities, and she gave me the answer I expected. She knew I bought and sold houses, that I had crews working on renovation projects, and that the income was sufficient to support our lifestyle comfortably. She assumed the work was profitable but not spectacular, successful but not transformative. The conversation that would change everything was still waiting, but first I needed to prepare Sarah for information that would alter her understanding of our present circumstances and future possibilities. The man she had married was about to become someone she had never fully known, and that transformation required careful handling. Sarah asked if I was considering expanding the business, and I told her that expansion was already underway in ways she hadn't seen. She asked if that meant we would need to change our lifestyle or make sacrifices for growth, and I said the opposite was true. We would soon have options we had never discussed because I hadn't wanted to make promises I couldn't guarantee. She looked at me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Her questions were becoming more specific, and my answers were becoming more revealing. The distance between partial truth and complete disclosure was shrinking with each exchange. That night, lying in bed while Sarah slept, I thought about the conversation that would happen soon. The documents that would prove what words could not adequately explain. The numbers that would transform her understanding of our financial situation. The revelation that would change not just how she saw me, but how she saw our life together. Margaret's transformation had been dramatic but simple. She had been wrong about my capabilities, learned the truth, and adjusted her opinions accordingly. Sarah's adjustment would be more complex because it involved not just correcting misconceptions but revealing deliberate omissions. She would need to understand why I had chosen privacy over transparency, and whether that choice reflected judgment about her or protection of us both. The next morning brought phone calls that reminded me why wealth management was becoming more complicated than wealth creation. My attorney needed approval for environmental studies on the Chandler development site. My accountant wanted to discuss tax implications of the upcoming property sales. My project manager needed decisions about upgrade specifications that would affect profit margins and sale timelines. Each conversation involved numbers that would have surprised Sarah if she had been listening. Budget approvals in 6 figures, revenue projections in 7 figures, asset valuations in 8 figures. The business that she thought was profitable was actually an enterprise that operated on scales she had never imagined. I spent the morning visiting job sites and the afternoon in meetings with investors who were considering partnership opportunities. A private equity firm wanted to provide capital for larger developments in exchange for ownership percentages. A pension fund was interested in purchasing completed projects for their real estate portfolio. Both opportunities would accelerate growth but also increase complexity. By evening, I had reached a decision that had been building for weeks. The time for gradual revelation was over. Sarah needed to know the complete truth about our financial situation, and she needed to know it soon. Margaret's transformation had shown me what was possible when people received accurate information instead of operating on false assumptions. I called Sarah at work and asked if she could leave early for a private conversation that couldn't wait for a more convenient time. She heard something in my voice that suggested importance beyond routine, and she agreed to meet me at home within the hour. When she arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the leather portfolio open and documents arranged for easy reading. Sarah took the chair across from me, and I began the conversation that would change everything we thought we knew about David and Sarah Chen. Sarah sat across from me at our kitchen table, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern, as she noticed the formal documents spread between us. The afternoon light streaming through our windows illuminated pages of financial statements, property records, and investment summaries that would reshape everything she thought she knew about our life together. I began with the simplest explanation possible. Sarah, I need to show you something that I should have shared years ago. These documents detail my business activities and our current financial position. What you're about to learn will change how you see our future, but I hope it won't change how you see me. She reached for the summary page, and I watched her eyes move across the numbers with the careful attention of someone translating a foreign language. Net worth, $47 million. Real estate holdings, $32 million. Investment accounts, $8 million. The figures were large enough to require double-checking, significant enough to demand explanation. Her first question was practical rather than emotional. How is this possible? I explained the timeline, starting with my first property purchase 8 years earlier and progressing through the systematic acquisition and development strategy that had built substantial wealth while operating beneath the surface of ordinary observation. Sarah studied the property records with the methodical approach she brought to complex projects at work. Each transaction told part of the story: distressed properties purchased below market value, systematic improvements that added functionality and appeal, strategic sales to investors who paid premium prices for quality work. The pattern was consistent across dozens of deals spanning multiple years. She asked why I had never mentioned the scope of these activities, and I gave her the honest answer. Initially, I wanted to prove the concept before making claims about potential success. As the business grew, I discovered advantages to operating quietly: better negotiations with sellers, more competitive bids from contractors, fewer complications from people who assumed wealth meant willingness to overpay for everything. But there was another reason I had been reluctant to acknowledge. I wanted our marriage to develop naturally, without the complications that significant wealth can introduce to relationships. I wanted Sarah to love me for who I was, not what I could provide. I wanted our decisions about the future to be based on shared values rather than financial capabilities. Sarah set down the documents and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. She was processing information that changed not just our financial circumstances but the context of every conversation we had ever had about money, security, and planning for the future. Her silence stretched long enough to make me wonder if transparency had been a mistake. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of amazement and something that might have been hurt. David, this means that every time I worried about our mortgage payments, every time I suggested we should save more aggressively, every time I chose the cheaper option because I thought we needed to be careful with money, you knew we could afford anything we wanted. I acknowledged that was true, and I explained my reasoning. Financial security was never in question, but I wanted us to make choices based on what we valued rather than what we could afford. I wanted our lifestyle to reflect our priorities, not our bank balance. I wanted to protect us both from the assumptions and expectations that visible wealth can create. She asked about specific instances when she had worried unnecessarily about expenses, and I admitted that those conversations had been difficult for me. When she stressed about the cost of her car repairs, I had wanted to tell her that we could buy any car she wanted without affecting our financial position. When she suggested we postpone vacation plans to save money, I had wanted to explain that we could travel anywhere without financial constraint. But I also explained why I had remained silent during those conversations. Our decisions about spending and saving revealed important information about Sarah's values and priorities. Her careful approach to money management demonstrated responsibility and thoughtfulness that would matter regardless of our wealth level. Her willingness to sacrifice immediate gratification for long-term security showed character that money couldn't buy. Sarah walked to the window and stood with her back to me, looking out at the neighborhood where we had built our life together. When she turned around, she was smiling, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She said that she needed time to understand what this revelation meant for our relationship and our future. I asked what questions she had, and she presented a list that revealed how completely the disclosure had affected her thinking. Would we move to a larger house in a more expensive neighborhood? Would we change our social circle to include wealthier friends? Would we start making charitable donations or political contributions? Would we have children sooner because financial constraints were no longer a consideration? Each question deserved a thoughtful answer, and I explained my perspective on the lifestyle changes that wealth could enable. We could certainly move to a larger house, but our current home had become comfortable and familiar. We could expand our social activities, but our existing friendships were based on shared interests and values rather than economic status. We could increase our charitable giving, but I wanted those decisions to reflect careful consideration rather than sudden capability. Sarah asked about my future plans for the business, and I described the projects currently in development and the opportunities under consideration. The residential subdivisions that would provide housing for growing families, the commercial developments that would create jobs and serve community needs, the partnerships with other investors that would enable larger projects with greater impact. She wanted to know if business success had changed my fundamental goals or values, and I assured her that my core priorities remained the same: building things that lasted, solving problems that mattered, and creating value for people who needed what I could provide. Wealth was a tool that enabled larger projects and greater impact, but it wasn't an end in itself. The conversation continued through dinner and into the evening. Sarah asked detailed questions about investment strategy, risk management, and long-term planning. She wanted to understand not just what I had accomplished, but how I thought about business decisions and financial responsibility. As we talked, I watched her transition from surprise to acceptance to something approaching excitement. She began to see the possibilities that wealth could create for both of us: the freedom to pursue work that mattered regardless of salary requirements, the ability to support causes and organizations that aligned with our values, the opportunity to build a family without financial stress or constraint. But she also expressed concerns about the responsibilities that came with significant wealth. She worried about maintaining perspective and staying connected to people whose financial circumstances were different from ours. She wondered about the impact on future children who would grow up with advantages that could either motivate achievement or discourage effort. I shared my own thoughts about wealth management and family responsibility. Money was a tool that could be used wisely or poorly, and our job was to ensure it served our values rather than replacing them. Children who understood the connection between effort and achievement would benefit from financial security. Children who expected success without working for it would be harmed by any amount of wealth. Sarah asked about Margaret's reaction to the financial disclosure, and I described the complete transformation in her attitude and expectations. The woman who had questioned my worthiness as a husband now understood that her concerns about Sarah's financial security had been based on incorrect assumptions about my capabilities and resources. We discussed how the revelation would affect family dynamics going forward. Margaret would likely become more supportive of our marriage and more interested in our future plans. Tom would probably want to explore potential business collaborations and investment opportunities. Both of them would need time to adjust their understanding of who David Chen really was. As the evening progressed, Sarah's questions became more specific and practical. She wanted to know about tax implications, legal structures, and estate planning. She asked about insurance coverage, asset protection, and succession planning. Her approach revealed the systematic thinking that had made her successful in her nonprofit work. I explained the professional team that managed the legal and financial aspects of wealth preservation: attorneys who specialized in real estate law and estate planning, accountants who understood tax optimization and investment strategy, financial advisors who provided guidance on portfolio management and risk assessment. Sarah asked if she would need to be involved in business decisions, and I explained that her participation would be entirely voluntary. The business operations were well established and professionally managed, but her input on major decisions would be valuable and welcome. Her perspective on community impact and social responsibility could influence future development choices. We talked about the immediate changes that would result from the disclosure. We could accelerate our timeline for starting a family without worrying about financial readiness. We could support Sarah's career goals without pressure to maximize her earning potential. We could make charitable commitments that reflected our values rather than our budget constraints. Sarah asked about the practical aspects of managing significant wealth, and I described the systems already in place: automatic investment strategies that grew assets without requiring daily attention, professional property management that handled rental operations and maintenance issues, diversified portfolios that provided steady income while protecting against market volatility. She wanted to know if wealth had changed my relationship with work, and I explained that financial independence had actually increased my focus on projects that mattered. Without pressure to accept every profitable opportunity, I could choose developments that contributed positively to community growth and long-term sustainability. As we prepared for bed, Sarah asked one final question that revealed her deepest concern. She wanted to know if keeping this secret had damaged my trust in her ability to handle financial responsibility or complicated decisions. I assured her that the decision to operate quietly had been about protecting both of us from external pressures, not about doubting her capabilities or judgment. The next morning brought a different kind of conversation. Sarah woke up with specific ideas about how we could use our resources to make a meaningful impact. She suggested establishing a foundation focused on affordable housing development. She proposed funding scholarship programs for students pursuing careers in social work and community development. She outlined volunteer opportunities that would connect us with organizations serving people in need. Her enthusiasm confirmed what I had hoped, that wealth would amplify Sarah's existing values rather than replacing them. She saw money as a tool for creating positive change, not just personal comfort. Her immediate focus on helping others demonstrated the character that had attracted me to her originally. We spent the weekend reviewing our options and discussing our priorities. Sarah wanted to increase our charitable giving immediately but thoughtfully, researching organizations and causes that could use our support effectively. She proposed setting aside a significant percentage of annual income for philanthropic purposes, treating generosity as a responsibility rather than an option. I suggested starting with smaller commitments to organizations we already knew and respected, then expanding our giving as we learned more about effective philanthropy. Sarah but insisted that we establish clear guidelines for charitable decision-making so our generosity would have maximum impact. She also wanted to begin estate planning immediately, ensuring that our wealth would be managed responsibly if something happened to either of us. We scheduled meetings with attorneys and financial planners who could help us structure our affairs to protect our assets while supporting our charitable goals. Monday morning brought a phone call from Margaret that confirmed how completely her perspective had changed. She asked if we could meet for lunch to discuss our family's future plans and her role in supporting our goals. Her tone carried a respect and deference that had been absent from every previous conversation. When we met at her country club, Margaret apologized again for her previous assessment of my capabilities and prospects. She acknowledged that her concerns about Sarah's future had been based on incomplete information and faulty assumptions. She asked how she could help support our marriage and contribute to our family's success. I thanked her for the apology and assured her that no lasting damage had been done. Margaret's initial skepticism had been based on visible evidence and reasonable concerns about her daughter's welfare. Her willingness to adjust her opinions when presented with new information demonstrated wisdom and maturity. Margaret asked about our plans for the future, and I outlined our thinking about family, career and philanthropy. She offered to connect us with charitable organizations she supported, introducing us to people who could help us make informed decisions about giving strategies and community impact. She also apologized to Sarah for questioning our financial stability and pressuring her to reconsider her choice of husband. Margaret admitted that her expectations had been shaped by her own experience rather than careful evaluation of our actual circumstances. She promised to be more supportive and less judgmental going forward. Tom joined us for dinner that evening, and the conversation focused on potential business collaborations and investment opportunities. He was interested in learning about real estate development and possibly participating in future projects. His medical practice had generated substantial income over the years, and he wanted to diversify his investments beyond traditional financial markets. I explained the basic principles of real estate investment and development, outlining the research and analysis required for successful projects. Tom appreciated the systematic approach and professional standards that guided business decisions. He asked about partnership structures that would allow him to participate without requiring full-time involvement. Sarah suggested that any family business relationships should include clear agreements about roles, responsibilities, and profit sharing. She wanted to ensure that business partnerships wouldn't create conflicts that could damage family relationships. Her concern demonstrated the thoughtful approach she brought to all important decisions. Over the following weeks, our life settled into new patterns that reflected our changed circumstances. Sarah reduced her work schedule to part-time, allowing her to pursue volunteer activities and prepare for the family we were planning to start. I continued managing the development business but delegated more operational responsibilities to free time for strategic planning and family priorities. We established a private foundation focused on affordable housing and community development, committing to annual contributions that would support meaningful projects without requiring us to manage daily operations. Sarah took the lead on foundation activities, bringing her nonprofit experience and community connections to guide our charitable work. Margaret's transformation continued to surprise everyone who knew her. The woman who had once questioned my worthiness now bragged about her son-in-law's business success to anyone who would listen. She introduced us to influential people in the community, recommending us for board positions and charitable committees where our resources and expertise could make a difference. The revelation that had begun with Margaret calling me worthless had evolved into a family story about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to understand someone's true capabilities and character. Sarah often reminded her mother that wealth and worth were different concepts and that David Chen had always possessed the qualities that mattered most in a husband and father. 6 months after the disclosure, Sarah announced that she was pregnant with our first child. The news brought celebration from everyone who mattered to us, and Margaret immediately began planning her role as a grandmother with the same intensity she had once applied to questioning my financial prospects. As I write this, our daughter Emma is 2 years old and our son Michael is 6 months old. They will grow up with advantages that money can provide, but Sarah and I are committed to ensuring they also develop the values and work ethic that create meaningful lives regardless of financial circumstances. Margaret has become one of our closest advisors on family matters and community involvement. Her initial skepticism has been replaced by genuine respect and affection. She often tells the story of how she misjudged her son-in-law, using it as an example of why assumptions about people's worth should be based on character rather than appearances. The business continues to grow and provide opportunities for community development that combines profit with positive impact. Sarah's involvement has brought new perspectives on social responsibility and community needs that influence every project decision. Looking back, I understand why the revelation was necessary and timely. Hiding wealth had protected us during the early years of our marriage, but continuing the secrecy would have prevented us from fully realizing the potential that financial resources could create for our family and community. Margaret's initial assessment of my worthiness had been wrong, but her underlying concern for her daughter's welfare had been absolutely right. Sarah deserved a husband who could provide security, stability, and opportunities for growth. I had always been that man, but the evidence hadn't been visible until I chose to make it so. The story that began with an insult about my worthlessness became a lesson about the difference between what people see and what actually exists. Margaret learned to look beyond surface appearances to understand true value. Sarah learned that her financial worries had been unnecessary, but that her careful approach to money management was still valuable. I learned that transparency, properly timed, could strengthen relationships rather than complicating them. The house where Margaret once questioned my prospects is now paid off and serves as the foundation for a family that will carry forward values of hard work, generous giving, and responsible wealth management. The garage disposal that started this story still works perfectly, maintained by a man who owns the buildings where similar appliances are installed but never forgets the satisfaction of fixing problems with his own hands. 5 years have passed since the day Margaret first learned about my business empire, and the changes in our family dynamic continue to surprise everyone who witnessed the transformation. What began as a story about misconceptions and hidden wealth has evolved into something deeper, a lesson about how relationships can strengthen when built on complete honesty and mutual respect. Emma is now 7 years old and Michael has just turned 5. They attend a private school that emphasizes both academic excellence and community service, reflecting our commitment to raising children who understand privilege as responsibility rather than entitlement. Every morning I drive them to school in the same pickup truck I've owned for 12 years despite Sarah's suggestions that we upgrade to something more befitting our financial status. The truck serves a purpose beyond transportation. It reminds me of where I started and keeps me connected to the work that built our wealth. More importantly, it shows our children that value comes from function rather than appearance, that a reliable vehicle matters more than an impressive one. They've learned to appreciate quality without requiring luxury, an attitude that will serve them well regardless of their future circumstances. Margaret has become our most trusted advisor on matters of family and community involvement. Her transformation from critic to champion has been so complete that people who didn't know our history would assume she had always been my strongest supporter. She regularly introduces me at charity events as the most successful businessman she knows, though she's careful to emphasize the character traits that enabled the success rather than just the financial results. Her evolution has extended beyond our immediate family. Margaret now volunteers with organizations that help women escape abusive relationships, using her experience of misjudging people to counsel others about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. She often tells the story of how she initially underestimated her son-in-law, using it as an example of why assumptions about worth should be based on actions rather than appearances. Last month, Margaret called me with an unusual request. She wanted to write a letter to the editor of the local newspaper describing how she had learned to recognize true value in people regardless of their economic status or social position. The letter would use our story as an example, though she promised to change names and details to protect our privacy. She felt that sharing the lesson publicly might help other families avoid similar misunderstandings. I appreciated her intentions but suggested that the story belonged to our family and should remain private. Public attention could complicate our children's lives and attract unwanted interest in our business activities. Margaret accepted my decision gracefully, but she continued to share the lesson in private conversations with friends and family members who faced similar challenges in their relationships. Tom's involvement in our real estate ventures has proven beneficial for everyone involved. His medical practice provides steady cash flow that he invests in our development projects, while his conservative approach to risk helps balance my willingness to pursue ambitious opportunities. We've completed 3 major projects together, each one more successful than the last. Our most recent collaboration involved developing a medical complex that serves an underserved community on the south side of Phoenix. Tom provided expertise on the design and equipment requirements, while I handled the construction management and financial planning. The project took 18 months to complete and now houses 6 medical practices, a pharmacy, and a community health education center. The success of our partnership has attracted attention from other medical professionals who want to invest in real estate development. Tom and I are considering establishing a formal investment group that would focus on healthcare-related properties, combining medical expertise with development experience to create facilities that serve both financial and community goals. Sarah's role in our foundation has expanded significantly as our charitable giving has increased. She now manages an annual budget of $3 million, directing funds to organizations that focus on affordable housing, education, and community development. Her background in nonprofit management has proven invaluable in evaluating potential recipients and measuring the impact of our contributions. The Foundation's most ambitious project is a partnership with the City of Phoenix to develop affordable housing for teachers, police officers, firefighters, and other public service workers. The development will include 200 units sold at below-market prices to qualified buyers, with financing assistance provided through Foundation grants. Sarah's involvement in the project has brought her into contact with city officials, nonprofit leaders, and community activists who share our commitment to addressing housing affordability challenges. These relationships have opened opportunities for additional collaborations that could have lasting impact on our community's development. Last year, the mayor appointed Sarah to a commission studying affordable housing strategies for the greater Phoenix area. Her position provides a platform for advocating policies that encourage private sector involvement in addressing community needs. The work is unpaid but deeply satisfying, allowing her to contribute expertise gained through our foundation activities. My business operations have continued to expand, but the focus has shifted toward projects that combine profitability with community benefit. Instead of simply buying distressed properties and flipping them quickly, we now concentrate on developments that provide long-term value to the neighborhoods where they're located. Our latest project involves transforming an abandoned shopping mall into a mixed-use complex that will include affordable housing, retail space for local businesses, and a community college satellite campus. The development required extensive negotiations with city planners, community groups, and educational officials, but the result will serve multiple purposes while generating reasonable returns for our investors. The project has attracted national attention from urban planning experts who see it as a model for repurposing obsolete retail infrastructure. We've received inquiries from developers in other cities who want to replicate our approach in their markets. These opportunities could lead to consulting contracts that would spread our impact beyond Arizona while generating additional revenue streams. Emma and Michael have begun showing interest in the business activities that occupy so much of their parents' time. Emma asks detailed questions about construction processes and enjoys visiting job sites where she can observe excavators and concrete trucks in action. Michael prefers the financial aspects, helping me count rental income and calculate profit margins on completed projects. Both children understand that their family has more money than most people, but they also understand that wealth brings responsibilities they will need to learn to handle properly. We've established savings accounts for them that require matching contributions from their allowances, teaching them that even abundant resources require careful management. They volunteer regularly at organizations supported by our foundation, helping with food distribution, reading to younger children, and participating in community cleanup activities. These experiences ensure they maintain connections with people whose circumstances differ from their own, preventing the isolation that can affect wealthy families. Last summer we took them on a trip to visit some of the properties we own in other states. They saw apartment buildings where families live, office complexes where people work, and shopping centers where communities gather. The trip helped them understand that real estate development affects real people in meaningful ways, that business success should contribute to community well-being. Margaret's grandmothering style reflects the lessons she learned about judging people accurately. She emphasizes character development over material achievements, praising Emma and Michael for kindness, honesty, and effort rather than just academic performance or athletic success. Her approach helps reinforce the values Sarah and I try to instill at home. She regularly takes them on outings that expose them to different economic environments and social situations. Museum visits, community festivals, and volunteer activities provide opportunities for them to interact with diverse groups of people and develop empathy for various life circumstances. Margaret has also become their storyteller, sharing family history that emphasizes the importance of hard work, integrity, and treating all people with respect regardless of their economic status. Her stories about overcoming challenges and learning from mistakes help them understand that success requires more than just financial resources. The relationship between Margaret and me has evolved into something neither of us could have predicted 5 years ago. She now asks my advice on financial decisions, investment opportunities, and charitable giving strategies. Her trust in my judgment represents a complete reversal from her initial assessment of my capabilities. When Margaret's friends ask her about successful marriages, she often cites our relationship as an example of why character matters more than circumstances. She tells them that the best husbands are men who demonstrate competence quietly rather than those who advertise their achievements loudly. Her changed perspective has influenced other family relationships as well. She's become more patient with Tom's methodical approach to decision-making, more supportive of their son's unconventional career choices, and more accepting of family members whose lifestyles differ from her expectations. The business has reached a scale that requires professional management beyond what I can provide personally. We've hired experienced executives to handle day-to-day operations, allowing me to focus on strategic planning and new opportunity evaluation. This delegation has freed time for family priorities while ensuring continued growth. Our management team includes experts in construction, finance, marketing, and legal affairs who share our commitment to responsible development practices. They understand that our success depends on creating value for communities as well as investors, that sustainable profitability requires attention to social and environmental impact. The company now employs over 200 people directly, with another 1,000 working for contractors and subcontractors on our projects. Payroll responsibilities reinforce our commitment to maintaining steady workflow and fair compensation practices that support families throughout the region. Sarah and I have begun discussing succession planning for both the business and foundation activities. While Emma and Michael are still young, we want to ensure that our values and approaches will guide future operations regardless of their personal career choices. We're developing educational programs that will expose them gradually to business operations and philanthropic activities, allowing them to discover their interests and aptitudes without pressure to follow predetermined paths. Their future involvement will depend on their capabilities and preferences rather than family expectations. The estate planning process has required extensive consultation with attorneys and financial advisors who specialize in wealthy families. We want to ensure that our children inherit both resources and responsibility, that they understand wealth as a tool for creating positive impact rather than personal indulgence. Recent market conditions have created new opportunities for acquiring distressed commercial properties at attractive prices. We've purchased 3 office buildings and 2 retail centers from owners who couldn't maintain mortgage payments during economic uncertainty. These acquisitions will provide steady income while we improve the properties for eventual resale. The strategy requires significant capital investment but offers substantial returns for patient investors willing to handle renovation complexity and tenant relations. Our experience with similar projects provides competitive advantages in evaluating properties and managing improvement processes. We're also exploring opportunities in renewable energy development, particularly solar installations on commercial properties we own. Arizona's climate and regulatory environment makes solar power economically attractive while supporting environmental sustainability goals that align with our values. Margaret's influence extends beyond our immediate family to the broader community, where she's become an advocate for judging people by their actions rather than their appearances. Her volunteer work with women's organizations focuses on helping participants develop confidence and self-reliance regardless of their economic circumstances. She often speaks at events about the importance of recognizing potential in people who may not fit traditional success profiles. Her message resonates with audiences who have experienced similar challenges in their personal and professional relationships. The transformation that began with her misjudgment of my worth has become a platform for helping others avoid similar mistakes. Margaret's willingness to acknowledge her errors publicly has created opportunities for meaningful dialogue about bias, assumptions, and the importance of looking beyond surface characteristics. Our annual family gatherings now include presentations about foundation activities and business developments, keeping everyone informed about how our resources are being used to support community goals. These meetings reinforce our commitment to transparency and shared responsibility for stewarding wealth effectively. Emma and Michael participate in these discussions at age-appropriate levels, learning about decision-making processes and impact measurement that will prepare them for future involvement. Their questions often reveal perspectives we hadn't considered, contributing valuable insights to our planning processes. The children's understanding of their family's unusual circumstances continues to develop as they mature and observe differences between their lifestyle and those of their classmates. We address their questions honestly while emphasizing that privilege brings obligations to help others and contribute positively to society. Looking toward the future, Sarah and I anticipate continued growth in both business operations and philanthropic activities. The foundation's success has attracted attention from other donors who want to collaborate on larger projects that could have regional or national impact. We're considering partnerships with organizations in other states that share our focus on affordable housing and community development. These collaborations could leverage our resources more effectively while expanding our geographic reach and policy influence. The business pipeline includes several major developments that will test our capacity for managing complex projects while maintaining quality standards and community focus. Success with these ventures could establish our reputation for responsible development practices that other companies might adopt. Margaret's journey from critic to champion represents more than just a change in opinion about one person's worth. It symbolizes the possibility for growth and learning that exists in all relationships when people remain open to new information and willing to revise their assumptions. Her willingness to admit error and adjust her perspective has strengthened our entire family's ability to communicate honestly about difficult topics. The trust that developed through this process has created a foundation for addressing future challenges with confidence and mutual support. The story that began with an insult about worthlessness has become a family legacy about the importance of looking beneath surface appearances to discover true value in people and relationships. This lesson continues to guide our decisions about business partnerships, charitable collaborations, and community involvement. As I write this conclusion, Emma is helping me review architectural plans for our next housing development while Michael calculates the square footage requirements for different unit sizes. Their involvement reminds me that the wealth we've built will ultimately be measured not just by financial returns but by the values and capabilities we pass to the next generation. The garbage disposal that started this story was replaced last year, finally wearing out after years of reliable service. I installed the new unit myself, maintaining the hands-on approach that keeps me connected to practical problem solving regardless of how large our business operations become. Margaret watched me work, commenting that she now understood why successful people often prefer to handle simple tasks personally rather than delegating everything to others. She had learned to recognize competence in all its forms, appreciating both the strategic thinking that builds wealth and the practical skills that solve immediate problems. The transformation continues, creating new opportunities for growth, learning, and contribution that none of us could have imagined when this journey began with a morning conversation about worthlessness in our modest kitchen 5 years ago. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.